Hello, I am Enrique Quesada, and this is the Judy Layallen Mexico Center podcast from the Center for the United States and Mexico at Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy. On June 6, 51% of registered voters went out to the polls to renew the lower chamber of the Mexican Congress. Voters in 15 states elected a new governor, and 30 states elected new state legislatures. Seen as a referendum on President López Obrador's performance in office, the preliminary results of the midterm elections show the president's party, Morena, and its allies losing their qualified majority. While they are poised to retain a simple majority, the possibility of passing constitutional reforms is all but gone. To discuss the implications of these results for Mr. López Obrador's agenda, the future of the opposition, and the state of the country's electoral institutions, I call Tony Payan. Tony Payan is a Françoise and Edward Djerejian Fellow for Mexico Studies and Director of the Center for the United States and Mexico at the Baker Institute, as well as a professor at the Universidad Autónoma de Ciudad Juárez. Here's our conversation. Tony Payan, Director for the Center for the United States and Mexico, thank you for being on the podcast again.
Pleasure to be here.
So, the midterm elections just happened a couple days ago. I'm excited to hear your thoughts on this. Certainly, there's a lot of talk about the results, who they are good for, and so who are the winners and who are the losers. I thought we would just start with the lower chamber of Congress and what happened there. So, according to the preliminary results, Morena has themselves, they would have around 197 seats. With their allies, they could get up to 279. This puts them, they would have a majority, but they would not have the qualified majority. So they would need 2/3 if they wanted to pass any constitutional reforms. So what do you make of this? I think this is the kind of the headline that everybody is talking about.
Well, obviously, everybody focuses on the numbers, and I think more than anything else, we need to think about what the numbers mean. I wouldn't begin with the numbers. I mean, obviously, we can discuss them in a minute. We can kind of parse through the specific number of votes and percentages. But I think there's something deeper here that I think is very important. One of the things that was on the table at this election, the stakes were very high. Mr. López Obrador had been somebody who had engaged, obviously, in populist politics, an attack on the press, on the national institutions, autonomous agencies or independent commissions, the press, his political rivals, and of course the National Electoral Institute, INE. We thought that much more was at stake in this election than the number of mayoral seats, congressional seats, and governorships that were in play. And at the end of the day, if you ask me, who's the biggest winner? I think it's Mexico's institutions. For a while, many of us thought that the institutions would not resist. This is a debate that we had in the United States with the Trump administration and his constant attacks on the institutions, on democracy, on political rivals, on really just traditions and institutions in the nation. I think Mexico was very much in the same place. And at the end of the day, Sunday the 6th, by 11 p.m., when we watched the results, despite specific acts of violence and despite the fact that dozens of candidates were either murdered or maimed, the INE demonstrated once more that it is truly a jewel of Mexican institutions. It ran the election, it ran it well, it ran it credibly, the results came out, it was well organized, 1.4 million citizens participated, the institution resisted all the attacks by the president and his political party, and here we are with new credibility. Nobody today is questioning the validity of the institutions, the INE specifically, and nobody is saying that the INE failed and that there was electoral fraud and that somehow the election was not run well. So at the end of the day, despite everything, I think Mexico's institutions and democracy are holding up. And that's really valuable. Now, beyond that, and that's not something to just dismiss with a comment. This is a serious, important outcome of this election. After that, of course, we can focus on the numbers. I mean, obviously, the Morena took 10 governorships out of 15, and they took a majority in Congress. And obviously, the opposition didn't do too poorly. In fact, if you look at the numbers, this is a divided country, and a lot of work has to be done to create new political consensuses. Obviously, Mr. López Obrador has not been able to do it, because if you think about the actual results, the President's Party, Morena, and its two allies, the Green Party and the Workers' Party, achieved around 48% of the total vote in the country. The opposition in coalition, the PAN, the PRD, and the PRI, and if you add the MC, which went all by itself, ran campaigns independent, it was kind of a third option. The Citizens Movement, if you add those four parties, that's 52%. So that's 48% for Mr. López Obrador. That's 52% for the opposition. That's a divided country. Now, you can say, why is it that 22 million votes for the opposition and 20 million votes for Morena and the president's allied parties resulted in 10 governorships for them and 5 for the opposition and a majority in Congress for the president? Well, that has to do with the distribution of the vote. If you look at the major cities in Mexico, Guadalajara, Monterrey, Mexico City, and of course, all the major metropolitan areas in Mexico, that's where the opposition had really overwhelming victories in many, many different cities throughout the country. And they won those cities, including Mexico City, which was the big surprise. And so at the end of the day, I think Mexicans demonstrated that they believe in their institutions. They came out to the polls, about 52% of them voted. The opposition got 52% total. And even though they won less positions at the state level, they won many cities across the across the country. And of course, they're going to hold a pretty sizable number of deputies in the lower chamber in Congress, enough to prevent any additional changes to the Constitution and to force Mr. López Obrador to negotiate at least somewhat with them. And if he doesn't negotiate, he has to believe, or he has to at least accept, that whereas in 2018, Morena got all by itself, I'm not talking about the coalition, I'm talking about the party itself, got 43% of the vote. This time they got 35%. So they complete that 50% plus one in the lower house with the allies, the Workers' Party and the Green Party. But by themselves, their number of votes actually collapsed from 43% to 35%. So at the end of the day, I think Mexicans really rebalanced the political system in an extraordinary way. Despite the apparent map, and you look at a lot of Morena red here and there and everywhere, the actual results show much more nuance than we think. And this was a very successful election, and nobody today really questions the organization, the running, and the results.
Yeah, so I think I agree with you that nobody's questioning the how elections happen. I think the National Electoral Institute showed that even if it is an expensive system, it is a system that has worked, and it shows that it continues to be extremely valuable for democracy in Mexico. I wonder if we're making too much of them having lost the qualified majority. I think that definitely helps stop, as you said, further reforms. And one of them seemed like they wanted to reform the electoral institutions, and so they will not be able to do that unless they are able to convince somehow more than 55 members of the opposition. But they still have a majority in the lower chamber, so they will still control the budget. They will still be able to pass laws that fit the agenda. So, I wonder if did they really lose that much in terms of what they will be able to accomplish?
Yes and no. I mean, obviously, again, I'm insisting here that we need to do nuanced analysis. They did lose the ability to pass constitutional reforms, which means the basic framework of what Mexico is today in terms of its institutions It's independent commissions to regulate various aspects of national life, from energy to telecommunications to elections and on, are going to stay in place. They're not going to fundamentally change in the next 3 years. And obviously, they're not going to be able to pass any additional constitutional reforms to reverse, for example, the energy reform of 2014, 2015. They're not going to be able to destroy the Electoral Institute. They're not going to be able to do any of that, at least not legislatively. So in that sense, I think I guess the wall is not breaking. Now, obviously, they're going to have a majority of votes. And I want to also nuance that, because that's not necessarily the case. And let me tell you why in a second. But for now, I think you're right. They're going to have a majority. It's a basic majority. It's about anywhere between 250 and 280 Congress members out of 500. They're going to do it. Okay, so they're going to be able to pass the budget, and they may be able to damage some of these institutions by depriving them of the resources that they need to function well through the budget. Okay, you starve them. You starve them to death, or you starve them to dysfunctionality or whatever. But the next president can come in and say the basic framework is in place, and we can restart these institutions. We can make them more robust. We can add them back into the budget, and we can make them more functional. So the damage can be done, sure, with a majority through the budget, but at the end, perhaps even some legal changes, but that means that in the future, that is easily reversed, whereas a constitutional change is not that easily reversed. So in that sense, I think the president has less room for maneuver and less room for pushing his general structural agenda of where he wants to take Mexico. And in that sense, some of his wings have been cut, so to speak. He's not going to be able to fly as high as he wanted to fly. And so in that sense, yes. Now, the problem for Morena, of course, is that it lost its majority, because you have to remember that Morena had a simple majority all by itself, right, with allied political parties. This time, they're going to end up with anywhere between 195 to 107 Congress members or so. That's about a 40% of the federal Congress. They're going to need the Workers' Party, and they'll probably have them at another 20, 25 Congress members, and that'll take them to about 225 to 230. That's still not a majority. So what matters here is that the Green Party, which is their ally, and they're going to have around 40 Congress members, are going to be the party that is going to be the deciding vote. I'm sorry.
Let me read you this that I found in an article by The Guardian describing the Green Party, because I think it describes them perfectly. It says the Green Party, which has rarely shown interest in environmental issues, has a record of political promiscuity. So I felt that was a very accurate description of it, and it seems like that will be at play now.
Well, absolutely. And by the way, the Green Party has they're not just a politically promiscuous party. They sell themselves to the highest bidder. Velasco, who's a leader in the Green Party, former governor of Chiapas, recently said, we're going to have to revalue our relationship with Morena. In other words, he's already sending the message that this is going to cost you. This is going to be expensive. What are we going to get in return for providing you the kinds of votes? So at the end of the day, Mr. López Obrador does not have his party's votes. And even if you add the Workers' Party's votes, he still doesn't have a majority. So the party that is going to be really the deciding factor here is the Green Party. And they are going to extract enormous concessions from Mr. López Obrador. And you cannot discard the possibility that they may smell weakness in the fourth transformation, Mr. López Obrador's project, and begin to side with the other side if they think that the other side has probabilities of running a good candidate in 2024, and now they're going to shift alliances to the other side. And so instead of giving the votes to Mr. López Obrador, they may end up giving the votes to the other side. That is the position that Mexico is in today. This minor party, which is highly corrupt and politically promiscuous, as The Guardian may say, correctly says, is now really the one party that is going to control the agenda, depending on where they think they should be on one side or the other. And you know that they've never hesitated to switch sides.
Right.
They sided with the PAN in 2000. They sided with PRI in 2012, and they sided with López Obrador in 2018. They have no ideology. They're not worried about the environment. They're worried about extracting resources, extracting concessions from whoever is in power. And so Mr. López Obrador cannot count on them. If he doesn't get to the price, if he doesn't pay them enough, then they're going to go to the other side. And they're going to provide the other side with the votes. And that's going to be a complicated governance mechanism for Mr. López Obrador. So he's not exactly in the most comfortable position at the end of the night.
What do you think happens with the opposition from now on? So both the PAN and the PRI did much better than they did in 2018. I mean, they did very poorly in 2018. So now they recovered some seats. But the PRI, for example, had, I believe, 8 governorships of the ones that were in play. They lost all of them. So the PAN was able to secure a couple governorships. So where do these two parties stand now?
Well, the one thing that we have to think about is that these parties, imagine if they had gone into the election alone, each on their own, they would have been swept out of existence with 17%, 18%, 20%, 11%, whatever it is, right? The opposition party, the PRD with, I don't know, 6, 7%, whatever it was, they would have been just wiped out. So building a coalition to add all these different fragments, the 18 to 20% from the PAN, the 17, 18% from the PRI, and the 6, 7% from the PRD was the right decision. Because at the end of the day, they got 44 to 47% of the vote together. If you add the MC, that's how you get to 52% for the opposition, overall opposition. So it was the right decision. And I know that many people who are more papist than the Pope and are purists and said, the PAN and the PRI, the traditional enemies in the 20th century and all this and all that, how can they go together? But it was the right decision. And I'm going to tell you that I think that at the end of the day, by going together, they did better and they strengthened each other. So this is one of those situations in which the whole is more than the sum of its parts. Alone, they would have just really been wiped out. Together, they held, and now that they have an important block in Congress and they have an important number of mayoral seats and they can block the president in constitutional changes and they can have a voice, they have essentially strengthened each other. So the PAN plus PRI plus PRD is no longer just the sum of 3 political parties. At the end of the day, it was 3 political parties plus what they gained by going together. And that was the brilliance of that political coalition, party coalition that they built. And I think together in 2024, if they choose a single candidate, they stand a chance. They stand a chance.
I feel like AMLO, before he ran in an anti-establishment or won partially because of an anti-establishment vote, and now it seems like the opposition is an AMLO vote with a new establishment, I guess.
Well, that's normal, right? When you get to power, you become the establishment.
Right.
I mean, he's still behaving as if he were anti-establishment without realizing that they're the majority party today and that they govern the country and they have control of Congress and they have the control of the presidency and now they have the control of most of the governorships and they decide a lot of the resources and a lot of the direction that the country is going in. So for them to still be playing that card, it's going to run out. That's going to wear out. It's not going to last. The interesting thing about the coalition that I think it's important to remark is that at the end of the day, who's the strongest party in the coalition? The PAN. The PAN will end up with probably 100 to 110 Congress members, really the largest component of it. And the PRI and the PRD will just have to follow. Fortunately, I think before the party coalition and the electoral coalition that they created, they also signed a legislative pact among themselves in which they obviously committed to not presenting any legislation if they don't first consult with each other and consensus the legislation with each other. So they're translating that, they're carrying that political electoral alliance into a legislative alliance. And hopefully they'll be able to present reasonable and good legislation that even if it doesn't pass because it is blocked by Morena, they can come out and say, we're trying to resolve this problem. This is our law. This is how we're trying to do it. And it's Morena who's blocking it. So they can now say that the blocker is the president's political party and its allies. That really means something, I think, politically. I think we're underestimating what that's going to mean over the next 2 years. By 2023, 24, when the presidential election runs around, that's also key. Now, you have to remember also, President López Obrador for a while coyly toyed with the idea of extending his mandate. Perhaps the people in Tabasco are asking me to get reelected. That's done. That's not going to pass. To do anything like that, they would literally need a constitutional change. They would need the kind of legislative action that now they don't have access to. So a lot of things are really going to be corrected. Even if they don't have 50% plus one, a lot of those things are now precluded precisely because they constitute a single block. It was the smartest, brightest thing they could have done when they put together that alliance.
Yeah, so the opposition may not be able to stop law, a regular law passing by a majority, but they can stop constitutional reforms, and in the hopes of winning back the presidential seat in 2024.
Yeah, because I think they have a double vision for themselves, right? One is the very first vision that I put on the table, which is essentially protect the institutions, protect the playing field, make sure the playing field is leveled, and then we can compete with each other. But for now, there's something much more existential at stake, which is the level playing field, the institutions, the ability for us to compete in such a way that the institutional arbiters of Mexican public life are not tilted against or in favor of any one of us. So that existential question, I think, was resolved on June 6th. Now we can fight over the substantive legislative issues. We can just, go at it. They're probably not going to win. Some legislation they're going to lose. The budget they're going to lose and all that. But at least they have assured a floor, and they've flattened the floor so that it's not so tilted against them.
Well, Tony Payan, Director for the Center for the United States and Mexico, thank you so much for this conversation and for this analysis.
Thank you, Enrique. I know it's probably not the kind of analysis that most people are making today. I'm much more optimistic. I've always been optimistic that the Mexican electorate as a whole, as a mass, is much brighter and much smarter than people give it credit for. And I think they just demonstrated that they can go out there to the polls and they can protect the institutions all by themselves, and they can rebalance political power all by themselves. And they did it, and it really was an extraordinary exercise, and the Mexican people came through, and the institutions came through, and I think it's time to celebrate, regardless of the color of Baja California or Chihuahua or San Luis Potosí or whatever happens, and how many members in Congress. At the end of the day, water is holding. So, a time to celebrate.
You certainly have had a positive view of the Mexican electorate and its capacity to choose. So, I think I agree with you that they showed it here, and we'll see what the new Congress does and how things go with AMLO and the fourth transformation. But
a little turbulence ahead, but the plane's not going to crash, and that's the good news. So,
well, we'll leave with that. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Enrique. Good to be here.
That was Tony Payan. That is it for this episode. Thank you for listening to the Judy Lay Allen Mexico Center podcast. Thanks to Lisa Wakata, our program manager, and to Tony Payan, the director of the Center for the United States and Mexico at Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy. A special thanks to Judy Lay Allen for her generous support of the work we do at the center. You can visit our website at bakerinstitute.org/Mexico, where you can find our latest publications. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the guests and the host and do not necessarily reflect those of the center. If you have any comments or suggestions, you can email us at usmexicocenter@rice.edu. We would love to hear from you. Mexico Centered is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, Radio Public, and Spotify. You can subscribe through your favorite podcast app to receive all of our new episodes directly on your phone. I am Enrique Quesada. I will see you next time.